My daughter-in-law slapped me and said, "Give me the keys." So I gave them to her with a locked-out notification. The sunlight from the tall windows poured across the hardwood floor, turning every speck of dust into something sharp enough to cut. I stood in the middle of the living room, clutching my sweater close, when Karen's voice sliced through the air like broken glass. "Give me the damn keys, old woman. You don't belong here anymore." Before I could even answer, her hand cracked across my face, and the silver ring on her finger tore the skin near my cheekbone. The sting came first, then my glasses hit the floor, one lens shattering against the tile. William stood near the staircase, his fists clenched, his shoulders tense, but he did not move. "Karen, enough," he said, voice trembling, eyes darting between us like a man watching a fire he could not put out. She spun on him, wild and furious. "You shut up! This leech has been sucking us dry for years. And you," her finger jabbed toward his chest, "you should have been the one to handle her, not me." For a second, no one spoke. The only sound was the steady tick of the grandfather clock behind me, mocking in its patience. I straightened my back, feeling the sting of her palm bloom across my skin, and said quietly, "You believe in money, Karen. I believe in truth. And truth," I added, "always stands with justice." She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that bounced off the walls. "Justice? In this house? Please. There's no justice here, just paperwork and ownership. Whoever holds the deed holds the power." I looked around at the house that had once been my home, the piano Henry used to play, the family photos that had quietly disappeared from the hallway, the smell of bleach and expensive candles replacing what used to be cinnamon and warmth. The house felt hollow now, like it was already grieving something I hadn't yet lost. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small ring of keys, and placed it gently on the glass coffee table. They made a small sound as they landed, softer than I expected. "If that's what you want," I said, "let's see what those keys can really open." Karen's lip curled into a smirk, a flash of triumph that didn't last long enough to be satisfying. William turned away, rubbing his forehead. The silence pressed down like thick air before a storm. "If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it." "Thank you so much. Keep listening." Karen scooped up the keys. "You see, William? That's how you deal with her. Firm, final." He didn't answer. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes found mine for just a second, and in that moment, I saw everything I had refused to believe for months: fear, guilt, and something colder than both: relief. I turned toward the window, the Nevada light spilling across my shoes, and spoke more to the air than to them. "When I was younger, your father used to say, 'A family isn't measured by its walls, but by how it treats the weakest inside them.' If this is what home means to you now, then perhaps I truly don't belong." Karen snorted. "Finally, you understand. You can pack your things tonight. We'll call the movers tomorrow." William flinched, but said nothing. I walked to the broken pieces of my glasses, knelt slowly, and gathered them into my palm. The sharp edge cut the skin of my finger, but I didn't wince. "Do you know," I said softly, "pain isn't always where it begins. Sometimes it waits, hiding behind silence." Karen crossed her arms. "Oh, please spare me the old woman wisdom. You've lived here rent-free for years. You've eaten our food, used our heat, and drained our savings. Don't act like you're the victim." I rose to my feet and looked at her, not the woman she was pretending to be, but the one underneath. Brittle, fearful, desperate for control. "You think I've taken something from you," I said. "But one day, you'll understand I was the last thing keeping this house from falling apart." She laughed again, but the sound trembled this time. "We'll see who's falling apart when the papers are signed." I stepped closer, just enough for her to see that I wasn't afraid. "Papers can lie, Karen. People can too. But truth never needs ink." Her smile faltered. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Perhaps," I said, "but not tonight." I turned to William. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you broke your arm climbing the maple tree in the backyard? You cried all the way to the hospital, and I told you pain means you're still alive, that you can still heal." His throat tightened, and for a second, I thought he might speak, but he didn't. He just lowered his gaze, letting silence answer for him. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair, draped it over my shoulders, and walked toward the hallway. My reflection followed me in the mirror, an old woman with blood on her cheek and calm in her eyes. Behind me, I heard Karen's voice again, distant and sharp. "Don't come crying back when you realize you have nowhere to go." I didn't turn around. My hand brushed against the doorframe, the wood worn smooth by decades of life. I whispered to myself, barely louder than the ticking clock. The pain isn't in the slap. It's in the silence that follows, when the people who should protect you choose to look away. Outside, the sun dipped behind the ridge, and the house on the hill fell quiet, except for the faint sound of keys still jingling in someone else's hand. After the slap, I moved back into the small room at the end of the hall, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I kept quiet. Silence has always been my sharpest tool. People mistake it for surrender, but silence is how you listen closely enough to catch the lies breathing. For days, I stayed invisible, watering my plants, fixing my broken glasses, pretending that nothing had shifted. But something had. Something deep and cold. I realized that as long as I stayed passive, they would think cruelty was their right. One morning, as I was sweeping the porch, I overheard two neighbors talking near the fence. "Did you hear?" one whispered. "The city's planning a new development. They say the properties near the ridge could be bought out for triple market value." That night, I decided to test what greed does to love by mentioning that rumor myself at the community meeting, as if it were nothing but casual talk over tea. The other gasped. "Triple? Lord, people up there will make a fortune." I smiled faintly, my broom pausing mid-air. That was when the idea came quiet and deliberate, like all the best lessons do. I said it casually, stirring my tea as if it were gossip, not bait. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People are quick to dream when money starts whispering. And just as I expected, that whisper reached inside my own house faster than any rumor could travel. By Thursday, I could hear Karen on the phone, pacing in the kitchen. Her tone was different, sweet, excited, but sharp around the edges. "William," she said, "if that thing about redevelopment is real, we need to act. This house could change everything." He murmured something I couldn't catch. Karen sighed, frustrated. "Don't be naive, Will. Your mother can't live forever. If we get her to sign the property into joint ownership, we'll be set when the city buys it out. It's not like she needs the money, she barely leaves the house." I sat in the next room, hands folded, listening. Not a single part of me was surprised. Still, the words cut deeper than the slap had. Violence is just noise. Betrayal is silence dressed in reason. Later that evening, I overheard them again. Karen's voice was lower this time, careful. "We'll tell her it's just paperwork. Something about streamlining the taxes. She won't even read it. Just get her to sign. I'll handle the rest." William hesitated. "She trusts me." Karen snapped. "Exactly. Use it." That was when I realized just how small my son had become under her shadow. Not cruel, just hollowed out. I didn't move, didn't interrupt. I just looked out the window, watching the reflection of the sunset on the glass. For years, I had taught children that truth always comes with a test. I never imagined that lesson would come back to test me. The next day, Karen came into my room with that bright smile that always meant trouble. "Mom," she began, using the word like it was borrowed. "Have you heard the talk about redevelopment? Exciting, right? We might finally get something good out of this old place." I looked up from my book. "Might we?" She sat down, crossing her legs, all casual ease. "Well, the process is messy, but if we handle it right, it could benefit everyone." I was thinking, maybe we should make the paperwork easier, add our names to the deed. You'd still live here, of course. Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes were cold. I smiled faintly. "You've been busy researching, haven't you?" She blinked, then laughed. "Just being practical." I nodded. "Of course. Practicality is a fine disguise for greed." Her jaw tightened. I'm only trying to secure our future. Our future, I echoed. Not mine, I suppose. The color rose in her face, but before she could answer, William entered the room. He looked tired, ashamed almost. Mom, it's not like that, he began. I held up a hand. Then what is it like, Will? Because from where I sit, it sounds exactly like that. He swallowed hard, eyes darting away. Karen stood, annoyed. You see, this is what happens when people get old. They twist everything. I met her gaze and said softly, and yet, somehow, the truth always untwists itself. She scoffed and walked out, muttering something about me being impossible. When the door closed, I sat back in my chair and let the silence settle. Through the thin walls, I could hear their muffled argument, his pleading, her fury. Every word confirmed what I already knew. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the afternoon light fell golden across the hill. From there, the neighborhood looked peaceful, almost holy. But inside every house, I wondered, how many people were selling pieces of their soul for a rumor? I smiled, not the smile of satisfaction, but the kind that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about who people are. There are lies that destroy, and there are lies that reveal. That evening, as the wind brushed through the trees and the sky turned copper, I whispered to the empty room. Some lies are not born of greed, but of necessity. They don't exist to deceive, they exist to expose. The test had begun, and the answers, I knew, were already writing themselves. The house had grown colder in the days after my little experiment. The air seemed heavier, the walls quieter, as if they too had begun holding their breath. William avoided my eyes whenever we crossed paths. He moved through rooms like a shadow, apologetic but wordless. Karen, on the other hand, had changed her performance entirely. Gone was the venom in her voice, replaced by something soft and sticky, too sweet to trust. Mom, she called from the doorway one afternoon, her tone light, rehearsed. Can we talk for a minute? I looked up from my teacup. The voice of a woman pretending to care always had a particular ring to it. Of course, dear. Come in. She walked toward me carrying a folder, smiling like she'd just done me a favor. I've been speaking with the county office, she said, setting the papers neatly on the table. They mentioned that when a property is owned by only one person, things can get complicated later, especially if redevelopment happens. I was thinking, maybe it's time to put all our names on the deed. You'd still live here, of course, but the paperwork would be so much easier. Her voice dripped honey, but her eyes gleamed like polished steel. William stood behind her, hands in his pockets. He didn't meet my gaze. It might make sense, Mom, he said quietly. Just for simplicity's sake. I smiled faintly. Simplicity for who, my dear? Karen leaned forward, her patience already fraying. Mom, people your age shouldn't have to worry about this stuff. Let the younger generation handle it. Times have changed. You don't need to complicate things because of pride. I set my cup down slowly. You think stubbornness and awareness are the same thing, Karen? Her jaw tightened. The room thickened with tension. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to hesitate before ticking again. William sighed and tried to step in. Karen, maybe this isn't the right. Be quiet, she snapped, spinning toward him. You've let her drain us long enough. This leech has been bleeding us for years, and you just stand there pretending not to see it. You should have handled her long ago. Her words echoed, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the wooden floor. I didn't flinch. I only straightened my shoulders and spoke softly, each word measured. You call me a leech, but tell me who's standing here with papers in hand, waiting to sell a home while the owner is still alive. Her face flushed red, the mask of civility slipping. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. If you don't sign, I'll have the court force it. We'll prove you're not of sound mind. You forgot to pay the power bill last month, didn't you? That's incompetence, Mom. I let out a low laugh. The power bill you paid on my behalf and kept the receipt, correct? For a moment, the words froze in her throat. I leaned closer, my tone calm but sharp. Be careful when you call someone insane, Karen. Madness often begins with the person holding the lie. William's voice trembled. Mom, please, don't make this harder than it has to be. I turned to him, the son I once carried through storms and sleepless nights. Hard? You think this is hard, Will? Hard is standing here, looking at two people who once called me family but now see me as a roadblock. He lowered his head. Karen gripped the folder tighter, her voice trembling with fury. Stay tuned. You don't know what you are waiting for, she spat. Maybe, I said, my voice steady, my smile cold as winter, but I've never once regretted refusing to play the fool. She slammed the folder on the table, papers scattering across the polished wood, and stormed out. William hesitated at the doorway, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something but cowardice won, as it always did. He followed her down the hall, his footsteps fading. I gathered the papers quietly, smoothing each page before folding them neatly. I placed them in the top drawer of the desk, not to keep, but to remember. Some people need scars to recall where the pain came from. I preferred documentation. Outside, the sky was turning the color of tarnished silver. The wind pressed against the windows, whispering through the cracks. I sat alone in the fading light, the weight of silence settling over the house again. I took out my phone and typed a message. The storm has a face now. A few minutes later, the reply came. Then it's time to build your shelter. Linda. Linda Moore. My oldest friend, and once one of the finest lawyers in Washington state. She'd been through her own hell, betrayed by a daughter who had forged her signature for money. If anyone understood quiet warfare, it was her. I looked around the house, the photographs missing from the walls, the piano with its keys gathering dust, the empty space where laughter used to live. Every corner held ghosts now, but I wasn't afraid of them. Ghosts are only memories waiting for witnesses. I touched the edge of the table where Karen's hand had slammed down, leaving a faint mark on the wood. No one is taking this house, I whispered. Not because it's valuable, but because it's the last place where truth still lives. The porch light flickered as if in answer. I took a slow breath and closed the curtains, my reflection looking back at me in the glass, older, calmer, but far from defeated. They think I'm finished, I said to the quiet room. But the only mistake worse than underestimating the elderly is forgetting which of us still knows the law. And as the night deepened outside, I poured myself another cup of tea, steady hands, steady heart, waiting for the storm I now knew by name. Linda arrived before noon, the Tacoma drizzle clinging to the brim of her hat like a quiet announcement. She moved with the steadiness of someone who had argued in courtrooms for decades and lost nothing but patience to fools. When she set her leather folder on my kitchen table, I felt a familiar steadiness settle in the room, as if an old friend had switched the lights on. I read your message, she said without preamble. You sounded like you were holding a storm in your chest. We sat on the back porch, where the air smelled of wet earth and rosemary. She unfolded the papers slowly, the way someone lays out a map. Tell me everything, she said. I told her about the meeting, the quiet days, the way Karen's voice went soft and predatory the afternoon she brought the papers. I left out nothing except the small seed of the rumor I had sown, because some things are tests you watch unfold and do not explain until they have names. Linda's face was calm, but her fingers tapped once against the folder, a metronome of resolve. When I finished, she thumbed through the county records with the efficiency of a woman who had once built careers on reading sentences others pretended to understand. Your title is clean, she said finally. Your name alone. No liens, no probate flags. Nothing that would give an unscrupulous buyer legal footholds. She paused, then added, but people don't steal titles as often as they steal time and patience. We need a structure that makes that impossible while you are alive. I knew what she meant. She had seen it before: children convinced by new voices, spouses who learned to love the shape of convenience. Establish the life estate, I said. Make it ironclad. Linda leaned back and smiled thinly. Ironclad is my middle name, Keir, but in legal form it is called a life estate trust with an irrevocable remainder to a charitable vehicle or named beneficiaries after your lifetime. The key is that while you live, you retain possession, and nobody may sell or encumber the property without your written consent. I will be co-trustee if you want me. Her offer was an anchor. Yes, I said. Be my co-trustee. She nodded and began to sketch the plan aloud, what paperwork we needed, the signatures required, the notary, a discreet way to transfer administrative access to the utilities and the locks so that the house remained hers in fact, as well as on paper. We will also set up a simple smart lock connected only to your phone. It is not about gadgets. It is about ensuring your authority cannot be bypassed by a paper signed under duress later, she added. Her voice was practical, edged with the kind of bitterness that comes from knowing the same cruelty in someone else's eyes. You know I lost my savings when my daughter forged my signature and sold off the condo, she said quietly. So I do this now not because I like paperwork, but because I have seen what greed will do. We worked through the afternoon. Linda called her old colleague at a title company. She drafted the trust language, careful to include a clause that would make any attempted transfer during my lifetime void and any litigation expensive enough to deter frivolous suits. She explained it to me in plain sentences. They cannot sell if the trust says they cannot sell. The court cannot help them do what their mother has legally refused. They will have to prove incapacity, and that means a medical evaluation, court appearances, and enough time for you to call witnesses. She looked at me and said, "We will make it so costly and slow that they will likely move on to easier prey." While Linda translated legalese into strategy, the house hummed with the small sounds of life-distant traffic, the drip of a leaky gutter, the kettle boiling on the stove. I thought of Henry's handwriting on the old deed, the creased corners of our tax files. I felt a fierce gratitude for the years he had kept our papers in order, for the work that had once taught me how to read the fine print as if it were a language of survival. Linda watched me gather the old deeds into a neat pile and slide them into my purse. "Keep your proofs close," she said. At that moment, a neighbor's voice drifted in from the yard below. Someone had been too eager with gossip. A woman I knew only by nodding from across her fence mentioned, loud enough for a passing stranger to catch it, that she had heard Keir was the first one to mention the buyout. The rumor ricocheted faster than I expected, and like a match thrown on tinder, it reached Karen before the legal papers were recorded. Karen burst through the front door 5 minutes later, cheeks flushed, eyes wild with a new understanding, the kind of rage that comes when someone realizes the tool they were using was actually the mirror. William trailed after her, smaller somehow in his wife's fury. "You old witch!" she screamed, breathless. "You were the one who started this. You set us up." I folded my hands on my lap, looked at her without surprise, and answered calmly, "Not set up, revealed. There is a difference." Her face contorted with disbelief, and then something more dangerous, humiliation, sharpened into fury. "You think the law will save you?" she spat. "You think you can hide behind a stack of papers?" Linda rose slowly, her calm a warning. "I am the woman who will be standing in front of a judge if you try anything," she said, voice steady as a gavel. "I wrote the clauses that protect her. I will argue them. I have done this before. I know the paths greed takes." Karen advanced, breath hot, words jagged. "Then I will prove she is incompetent," she warned. "We have evidence." Linda's eyes narrowed. "You have receipts she did not understand? You have a missed bill or two? You have the grocery lists she forgot? You will need more than that. You will need medical proof, sworn experts, and time. Time you will not have." With that, Karen flung a hissing promise and stormed from the house, the screen door slamming with a sound that seemed to echo Linda's own old courtroom victories. William remained, shoulders bowed, watching her leave. Linda drew a breath, then reached across and clasped my hand. "Now," she said, quietly fierce, "we do not speak unnecessarily. We file. We wait. When we are needed, we speak with evidence and the law at our back. Until then, your silence is the loudest argument." I let her hand close around mine and, for the first time in days, felt the calm steadiness of a plan. I smiled, not a smile of triumph, but of someone who knows how to keep watch. "Silence," I said, "is the strongest argument an old woman has left." They came back later than I expected, bells of laughter still clinging to them like perfume. I was standing at the sink, rinsing a plate, the ordinary domestic rhythm keeping my hands steady. Linda sat at the table with a stack of files, her pen paused as if the whole house might tip with the next sound. The kettle was warming on the stove. I had arranged everything to look as if nothing had changed, because appearances keep people honest longer than accusations do. The front door sounded before I saw them, a shuffle of jackets and a drag of heels. I heard Karen's voice first, bright and careless, then William's quieter steps behind her. There was a moment of fumbling at the deadbolt, a searching of pockets, a small curse. Then the phone in Karen's hand emitted a soft, mechanical note, an announcement in cold text on a bright screen. She read it out loud without meaning to, as if the letters had the force of accusation. Access revoked. Owner, Keir Dalton. The words landed between us like a weight. She tugged the key harder, the brass scraping uselessly. "Open this door, you." Her voice broke into something worse than anger, a raw animal sound. She pounded once, then harder, nails leaving pale crescents on the wood. "Open the door, old witch! You cannot do this!" I turned the faucet off and set the plate on the drying rack. My hands did not shake. I walked to the intercom and pressed the button that would carry my voice into the foyer. The tone of my words was softer than I felt, slow and clear. "You told me I did not belong in this house," I said. "Now I am simply letting you live in the truth of what you said." William's face had gone pale, the shame raw and immediate. He stood with his head bowed, looking like a man who had finally been asked to answer for his years of silence. "Mom, please," he pleaded. "We can fix this. We will call whoever we must. I will sign anything." "No, Will," I answered. I could hear Linda move in the background, a chair scraping, a pen clicking as she prepared for whatever would come next. "You say you will sign. You say you will fix paper. I am not asking for paper to be fixed. I am asking for you to see what you have become when you think the easiest path is the one that steps over the most vulnerable." Karen screamed then, a high and bitter sound. "You will die alone. You cannot keep my child from a future because of your pride." "If solitude is the price of freedom," I answered purely, "then it is a price I am willing to pay." She kicked at the bottom of the door until it shuddered in its frame. She tore at the mail slot with both hands, like someone trying to wrest a window into the world. Then, stunned by the locked resilience of the house she thought she owned by aspiration, she let out a sob that sounded like rage turned inward. William tried to steady her, putting a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged him off like a man who has become a nuisance. They backed away from the wood as if it had a pulse of its own. They left, gravel crunching under the tires until the night swallowed the sound. I stood at the intercom for a moment longer and listened to the echo of my own voice in the empty entryway. The kettle hissed softly in the other room. Linda joined me, setting her folder down like a small, deliberate exclamation. "They think they have been excluded," she said without looking at me, the courtroom rhythm of her voice settling into the house. "They will call their lawyers, they will make threats, they will try to frighten you into something you do not want. The law is slow and messy, but it bends toward clarity when the facts are plain." I poured the tea carefully, the little act of pouring a private rhythm into a night that had been wild and public in equal measure. Linda took her cup from me, folded her hands around it like a shield. "You have done the right thing," she said simply. "You made ownership match reality." Ownership is an odd word to hold when you understand what it truly means. I had spent a lifetime making lists, balancing ledgers, ensuring that a signature meant more than a loud voice. Tonight the ledger had been turned and the signature had followed. They had assumed that entitlement equaled right. They had not thought a woman who had kept records for a life would remember how to use them. Outside, a nightbird called twice and then fell quiet. I sipped my tea and let the warmth steady me. Linda closed her folder with a slow motion that signaled readiness more than triumph. "They will come back," she said. "They will march and plead and threaten. We will meet them with papers and witnesses and, if we must, with the law itself." I looked at the dark window where the faint reflection of my face hovered lined, patient, not undone. "They think they are out of the game," I said. "They have not learned the rules." She smiled, a thin and steady thing. "No," she agreed. "The rules were always written. You simply chose to read them aloud." We sat in the kitchen and drank our tea while the house held itself like a defended country. For the first time in days, the quiet in the rooms felt protective instead of hollow. The lock had clicked shut, and with it came a strange and clean kind of relief. The alert woke me with a small, insistent chirp at 3 a.m. I sat up, the house still heavy with sleep, and tapped the screen by the bed. The security feed filled the room with grainy light and the slow, deliberate movements of 2 figures at the back of the house. Karen and William. They moved with the terrible, clumsy choreography of people who think desperation excuses sin. Karen held a canister. William lit a small lighter with hands that trembled. The porch light threw long, ugly shadows across the siding, and their whispers were sharp and hateful in the narrow feed. "If we burn this, the insurance will cover it," Karen breathed. "We can buy another place. It will be clean. It will be ours." He answered with a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob, a man who had stopped listening to his own heart. I pressed the record button. I held my breath. For a very long time, I had kept records, ledgers, receipts, lists of every bill and phone call. I was a woman of paper. Paper remembers what passion forgets. I tapped 3 numbers on the screen and did what my hands had been trained to do for decades. I called 911 and left the line open. I let them speak while the line listened. Linda was awake at her end of town, the small blue dot on her app blinking steady, and she kept the operators on the call, ready with the address and with her own voice at the ready. They moved to the back corner, away from the camera, whispering about matches and about insurance and about starting over. William fumbled with the lighter and cursed. Karen hissed, "Hurry, hurry," and her voice was thin as wire. I could feel a strange calm beneath my ribs because I had known, long before the canister came out of the truck, that a thing that begins in stealth ends in evidence when it meets light. The police arrived 10 minutes later with the authority that the quiet hand of the law wields. Headlights cut the night into angles. Sirens did not wail because the call was precise and the officers practiced. Linda spoke to them on the porch and pointed at timestamps and file names as if she were handing them a map. I watched from the kitchen window as the patrolmen moved with careful steps, as they found the canister, as they found the lighter and the gloves, as they found the fingerprints on the rim and the muddy shoe prints that marched away from the side gate. They cuffed them with a quiet motion that was kinder than most words they had heard from each other in months. At the station, under the harsh light and the small, interrogative questions, I sat and watched the evidence gather into a shape even greed could not deny. The footage, the audio of their plotting, the statements from the neighbor who had seen them at the truck, the prints, all of it made a line that connected impulse to intent. The prosecutor moved with the economy of someone who has read a life in the small details and knows how to explain it to a judge. The defense tried sympathy, tried to tell a story of stress and poor judgment, of 2 people pushed to the edge, but the law is a slow and patient thing, and it waits for proof. The courtroom smelled like paper and old polish, and the kind of fear that sits in other people's shoulders. Karen wailed and cried. Tears do not always mean repentance. William lowered his head and looked small and broken, a man stripped of every excuse he had ever rehearsed. The judge listened, then read aloud the charges: attempted murder and conspiracy to commit arson. The words landed like stones in the rafters. I sat very still. I had no taste for spectacle. I had only the ledger of truth, and it had been faithful. When the verdict came, it arrived with the weight of consequence. The jury found them guilty. Sentencing was brutal in its plainness. 16 years for Karen, 15 years for William. The numbers thudded into the room like a final accounting. They had chosen to place a match against a house where an old woman slept, and the law answered in long, sober terms. William looked at me in the moment between verdict and sentence. His eyes were wet, and the apology slipped from his lips like a child's confession. "Mom, I am sorry," he said, and the sound of it was small as the ring of keys on my table. I inclined my head. There is a mercy in acknowledgement, but it arrives late, and it is thin. "Regret that comes late is still regret," I said softly. "I hope it reaches deeper than the skin." They were taken away in the rusted quiet of a van that seemed to swallow heat. I stood on the porch as their taillights faded. My hands were steady. I had loved long enough to understand that forgiveness is not an obligation. It is a choice. I had kept records, and records had kept me. I had not wished ruin on them, I had wished truth. The court had done its work. At home, the house held its breath with me. The kettle sang, and Linda made tea with the same careful motion she used to cross-examine a witness. We sat and drank in silence that was not emptiness this time, but a cup refilled with possibility. Outside, the night softened, and the stars put themselves back into place. I thought of Emma, and of the small bright thing she might yet become, and in that thought, the house felt less like a battleground and more like a place where a life could be rebuilt from evidence and care. After the sentencing, the air outside the courthouse felt thinner, as if justice had taken up all the oxygen and left only the silence of consequence. Reporters murmured on the steps, flashes went off, and somewhere in that storm of voices, a small one called my name. "Grandma." Emma stood there, holding Linda's hand. Her hair was tied back the way Karen used to do when she was younger, but her eyes, those belonged entirely to herself. Wide, watchful, too calm for a child who had just seen her parents taken away in handcuffs. The judge had ruled for joint guardianship between me and Linda until she turned 18. I had expected relief, but what I felt instead was awe and a deep ache. She walked toward me, slow but steady, her small sneakers scuffing the courthouse tile. When she finally reached me, she looked up with that unbearable honesty only children still possess. "Grandma," she said again, her voice almost breaking, "I'm sorry for what they did. I'm not like them." I bent down, took her hands into mine, and felt how cold they were despite the afternoon heat. "You don't have to apologize for anyone else, Emma," I said softly. "Just promise me you'll live differently. That's all." Linda smiled faintly and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "She has a spark," she said, her tone half proud, half protective. "Reminds me of you when you still thought the world could be rewritten." I laughed under my breath. "Maybe that's the only fire worth keeping alive at our age," I replied. That night, when we brought her home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. Emma stood in the hallway, staring at the pictures that still hung along the staircase, photos of birthdays, graduations, vacations long before greed had turned love into debt. She pointed to one. "Is that Dad?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said, when he still believed doing the right thing was easy. She nodded, and for a moment I could see the conflict behind her eyes, the impossible weight of loving someone who had done something unforgivable. Then she whispered, "I'll make our name mean kindness again." The sentence landed in my chest like a promise that had skipped a generation and finally found a home. Linda was setting tea on the counter, pretending not to listen, but I could hear her muttering approval. "She's got the Dalton backbone," she said. "That kind of resolve can either build a future or burn down what's left of the past." Emma turned toward us, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Then I'll build," she said. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And I'll be here to see it, Emma," I said, feeling something ease in me that hadn't eased in years. "This house, this life, it's yours to fill with meaning again." She leaned her head against my arm, a gesture so small and so vast it made the room suddenly quiet. The walls seemed to exhale. Linda poured the tea, the steam curling into the lamplight. Later, as I tucked Emma into bed, the same bed where I had once cried alone after the first betrayal, I realized the house no longer echoed with bitterness. It held something else now, a softer sound. A future stretching its fingers through the cracks where grief used to live. When I turned off the light, Emma whispered drowsily, "Good night, Grandma." I paused at the door, looking back at her. "Good night, my girl," I said. "Sleep easy. Tomorrow, we start fresh." And for the first time since the night of the fire, I believed it. In her promise, I felt the world begin to heal, one small voice at a time. When the trial ended and the last signatures had dried, I felt something close, not just in law but in the air itself. Justice doesn't echo loudly, it settles. Linda handled the paperwork for me, her hands still steady as ever. Together, we dissolved the Life Estate Trust, sold the old house on the hill, and I asked that most of the proceeds be donated to the Hearth Project, an organization dedicated to helping older women who had been deceived, abandoned, or left behind. It felt right. The money had come from a house built on betrayal. Better it build something clean in return. The rest, we used to start anew. Linda found us a small cottage by the lake in Washington, with peeling white shutters and a porch that faced the sunrise. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, quiet, warm, honest. On the day we moved in, Emma stood at the threshold, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "It smells like rain and old books," she said, smiling. "That's how you know it's a good home," Linda replied, setting down a box marked Tea and Faith. Mornings there had their own kind of peace. Linda brewed chamomile or jasmine, depending on her mood. Emma sat by the window, bent over her schoolwork, the tip of her pencil tapping softly to a rhythm only she heard. I tended to the flowers outside, violets, marigolds, and a stubborn rose bush that refused to die even when winter tried its best. Some mornings, when the mist still hovered over the lake, we'd all gather on the porch, cups in hand. The world would be hushed except for the loons calling in the distance and the faint rustle of willows. Those were the hours when silence finally felt kind. One morning, Linda looked over at me as steam curled from her mug. "Funny, isn't it?" she said. "We lost blood but found family." I laughed quietly, the sound rolling out like a sigh I'd been holding for years. "And this time," I said, "no one can demand the keys." She smiled and raised her cup. "To that, I'll drink twice." In the afternoons, Emma would help me water the garden. She had a way of talking to the plants as if they were old friends who needed reminding that life was still worth blooming for. Sometimes she'd ask questions about the past, careful, curious questions that came not from pity but understanding. "Do you miss them?" she asked once, her small hands steady on the watering can. I thought about it, watching the ripples spread through the soil. "Missing someone," I said slowly, "isn't the same as wanting them back. I miss who they were before they forgot themselves, but I don't miss the noise." She nodded, her eyes older than her years. "Then we'll make this place quiet but good quiet." That evening, we ate dinner by the lake. The sky turned gold and violet, and the water mirrored everything: light, shadow, memory. Linda hummed some tune from decades ago, while Emma copied her rhythm on the table with her spoon. Afterward, I sat by the window with my old leather journal, the same one that once held fear, loss, and small fragments of resolve. I turned to the last blank page and wrote, "The day they slapped me, I thought I had lost everything. But that was the day I began to reclaim my life." Outside, the willow branches swayed over the water, the light softening into that rare moment between day and night when everything seems forgiven. I closed the book and looked toward the lake, where the surface shimmered with the last touch of the sun. "They wanted the keys," I murmured to myself, feeling the words settle like prayer. So, I gave them, along with a locked-out notice, and in the click of that lock, I paused, listening to the faint echo of the waves against the dock. I finally heard what they never could understand. Linda turned from the sink, smiling. "And what's that, Kerr?" I met her gaze, my voice calm, certain. "That freedom," I said, "never asks for permission." The wind stirred through the open window, carrying the scent of tea and lake water. Emma's laughter rang from outside, light as wings. 3 hearts, 1 roof. No bloodlines needed, just truth, kindness, and the quiet that follows justice. And that, my dear ones, was my story. Not a tale written to wound, but one lived to remind that sometimes the sharpest justice comes not from fury, but from peace hard-earned. They thought a slap could silence me. They thought a house, a name, a key could take away who I was. But here I am, still standing by the lake in Washington, tea cooling beside me, the sunset resting on the water, like forgiveness that took its time to arrive. I learned that when you stop begging to belong, freedom walks right in. And that even after betrayal, the heart can rebuild not with vengeance, but with purpose. If this story found its way to your heart, if you felt the sting, the justice, the quiet redemption, then don't let it end here. Hit subscribe to Grandma True Stories and help me keep these truths alive, the ones too many women have lived and too few have spoken. Every time you listen, every time you share, you keep the voices of the quiet ones breathing. because silence only wins when we stop telling the truth. I'll be right here on the porch of memory, waiting for the next story that needs to be told. Until then, my loves, stay kind, stay brave, and remember, revenge has no expiration date, and wisdom doesn't shout. It remembers.